A young millionaire married me to avoid an arranged marriage. My true identity shocked him. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I still remember the night it began, though I wish I could forget it. Before that night, my life felt steady, not perfect, but safe. I had routines: wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner with my parents. I thought family was my safe place. I thought they would protect me. I thought I was seen. I was wrong. I can't even tell you the first time I noticed it. The small things, the way she looked at me sometimes, not with kindness, but with something sharper, a look that didn't match the words she said. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was imagining it. But soon, those small things became bigger, heavier. Her words began to change. They weren't just careless remarks anymore. They were pointed, mean, saying things about me that no one should say, about who I was, about how I lived my life. And I started to notice how she did it when no one was looking, or when people were just close enough to hear, but far enough not to intervene. I tried to speak to my parents about it. I thought they would understand, would stand up for me. But every time I brought it up, they brushed it aside. Sometimes they would say, "It's just stress, Alec. Don't take it so seriously." Sometimes they wouldn't say anything at all. The silence hurt worse than her words. I could see it in their faces. They heard me, but they chose not to act. That silence became heavier with each passing day. It followed me into my room. It followed me to work. It followed me everywhere. It was like living under a shadow I couldn't escape. Every time I heard her speak, that shadow grew. I stopped laughing the way I used to. I stopped speaking freely. I started shrinking into myself. And then the night came when everything changed. I was home later than usual. My heart was tired, my body heavy from the day. The house felt different, quieter. Even the air felt thicker somehow. I heard voices in the living room, low and sharp. I didn't need to hear every word to know it wasn't a normal conversation. My heart started pounding in my chest. I stayed quiet. I didn't want to interrupt, but something inside me told me to listen. I crept closer. Her voice was cutting, deliberate. I could hear my parents too, their voices low but not protective. My chest tightened. I froze in that moment. I could feel the air between us, heavy with things unsaid. And then I realized they weren't stopping her. They were letting it happen, watching quietly. That night, I learned something I didn't want to believe. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you choose silence instead. And silence is not safety. Silence is betrayal. I remember going to my room and sitting there, trembling. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying every word in my mind, over and over again, as if trying to find where it all went wrong. But the truth was, it didn't go wrong in one night. It had been going wrong for a long time. I just hadn't been able to name it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my world was collapsing quietly. It wasn't the noise that broke me. It was the silence. I didn't know it then. But that night was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change me forever. Because what I didn't understand at the time was what she was doing to me wasn't just personal. It was part of something deeper, something that happens when voices are silenced, when pain is ignored, when injustice is left to grow quietly, and I was living it. The next morning, nothing felt the same. I woke up and the sunlight spilling through my window felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I tried to move the way I always did: wake up, get ready, go to work, but even those small routines felt impossible. I kept hearing her voice, the way she spoke that night, like a blade slicing quietly through my skin. At work, I couldn't focus. Every sound, every movement felt sharper, more intense. I kept checking my phone, thinking maybe they had called me, my parents, but there was nothing, just silence. By lunchtime, I was exhausted, not just tired from lack of sleep, but tired from carrying something invisible that no one else seemed to notice. I found myself watching people around me, how they smiled, how they argued, how they defended themselves. And I wondered, why was it so hard for me to defend myself? That night, I tried to speak again. I waited until dinner. The table was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries tension like smoke in the air. I took a breath, and I said her name softly. My mom said things last night, hurtful things. My voice cracked. My hands tightened around my fork. My father glanced at me once, then looked away. My mother didn't say anything. The silence felt heavier than before. "It's not just words," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "It's the way they make me feel. Invisible, unwanted." Still silence. I felt like shouting. I wanted to scream until they listened, but something inside me kept quiet. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was knowing that silence had already won. The days after that got harder. I began avoiding her, avoiding the living room, avoiding eye contact. I stopped sharing anything about my life with them. I felt like I was disappearing in my own home. I didn't know how to speak up without breaking. Then came the evening when everything escalated. I was in my room when I heard voices again. This time, louder, anger. Not just hers, but theirs too, though quieter, almost reluctant. I stepped closer to the hallway. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they could hear it. They were talking about me, not as me but as if I wasn't there, as if I were a problem to be solved. I heard her say something sharp, something about my worth. My parents didn't disagree. They stayed quiet, but I could feel the weight of their silence. Something in me broke that night, not completely but enough. Enough to make me stop pretending I could ignore what was happening. Enough to make me understand that this silence was not just a pause, it was permission. That night, I decided I had to face it. Face her, face them, even if my voice trembled, even if it hurt, even if I had nothing left but my own courage. The next day, I spent hours preparing what I wanted to say. I wrote it in my head 100 times, each version filled with pain and fear. But still, I rehearsed it. I needed them to know, not just the words, but the truth behind them. When dinner came, I sat at the table, with my heart pounding. I could see her eyes on me, sharp and calculating. My parents looked distant, tired, like they had already decided what side they were on. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk," I said softly, and for the first time in months, I didn't look away. I told them everything, the way she spoke to me, the things she said, the way it felt to be ignored. I told them about the silence, how it hurt worse than any words. I told them I was tired of being invisible. I waited for them to speak, to defend me, to comfort me, but they didn't. They stayed quiet. That silence was louder than any argument, and I knew then that this wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was something much deeper, something I could no longer ignore, something that would change my life forever. The days that followed were heavy. I walked through my home, as if I were treading on glass, every step careful, every word measured. I wanted to speak, but I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I opened my mouth again, afraid of the silence that might follow. It was strange how silence could feel like violence, how it could fill a room with something cold, heavy, and unshakable. I started avoiding dinner. I stayed in my room more. My parents didn't ask why. They didn't push. They just let the distance grow. I began to feel like I was living inside a shadow of myself. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about how all my family stood by without stopping it, without speaking up, and it was eating me alive. One evening, I overheard her talking to my father in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen, but her voice was sharp enough to slice through the walls. I could hear her saying something about me, how I was too sensitive, how I took things too personally. My father's voice was low, almost dismissive, but she kept going. The words were heavy, cruel, and deliberate. Something inside me snapped. I stormed into the kitchen. My hands were shaking. My voice trembled so badly I barely recognized it. "Why?" I said, the word barely escaping my lips. "Why do you do this to me?" They both froze. My mother looked away, and my father didn't answer. The silence between us was louder than any argument could have been. I could feel tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. That night, I lay awake thinking about what happened. I felt exposed, but also strangely alive. For the first time, I realized this wasn't something I could hide from anymore. This wasn't something I could carry quietly. The truth was, her words were no longer the worst part. The worst part was their silence, their decision to let it happen, and that realization hurt more than anything. Over the next few days, I became quieter in the house, but inside me, something was changing. The fear was still there, but so was a growing fire. I started writing again, pouring everything into my journal. Every insult, every look, every moment of silence. I wrote until my hand ached, until my chest felt lighter. But writing was not enough. I knew it. I needed them to hear me. I needed them to stop pretending this wasn't happening. One night, I decided I would confront them again, not just for myself, but for the truth. I wanted them to know that silence was not protection, that ignoring pain was allowing it to grow. that ignoring injustice made them part of it. Dinner was tense that night. I could feel it before I even walked in. My mother avoided my gaze. My father looked tired, but not in the way tired people are. He looked tired in a way that meant giving up, and she looked at me like I was a storm she could not control. I took my seat quietly. I didn't speak until everyone had begun eating. Then I looked at them, straight in the eyes, and I said, "We need to stop pretending. We need to face what's happening here." They all turned to look at me, surprised. My voice was low but steady. "This isn't just about me being upset. This is about respect. This is about seeing each other. This is about standing up for what's right before silence destroys us all." Her eyes narrowed. My father shifted in his seat. My mother stayed silent. That silence, again heavier than ever, wrapped itself around me. But I kept speaking. I told them how her words had crushed me, how their silence had broken something inside me, how I had been shrinking into myself just to survive. And for a moment, it felt like they were hearing me. But then the silence returned, the kind that felt like walls closing in. I knew then that this wasn't something that would end with words. This was something bigger, something I would have to live with and fight for every day. That night, I went to my room and closed the door. I sat on the floor and let the tears finally come. They were not tears of weakness. They were tears of truth, tears that knew the fight was far from over. And deep down, I realized that the next step would change everything. Because silence doesn't just hide injustice, it allows it to grow. That night, sleep didn't come. My mind was loud. Every word she had ever said to me, every moment of silence they had given her, it all echoed like a chorus of pain in my head. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in. My heart was heavy, but something inside me was restless. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I couldn't keep carrying it inside me like it was my fault. I got up, dressed quietly, and went to the kitchen. They were already there, my mother pouring coffee, my father scrolling through his phone. She was there too, her eyes sharp as if she could smell the storm coming. I sat down, and the air felt heavier than usual. I took a breath and said, "We need to talk now." Her eyes flicked to me, surprised. My father looked away, and my mother stayed quiet. That silence, it wasn't peace, it was fear. I began speaking. My voice was steady but filled with trembling fire. I told them everything, the nights I had stayed awake, wondering if I was enough. The way her words cut deeper because no one stopped her. The way their silence had become a wall between us. I told them how it felt to be unseen, how it felt to be discarded. Halfway through, she interrupted, her voice sharp, cutting through mine like a blade. "You make it sound worse than it is," she said. "You're just being dramatic." I froze, my chest tightened, but I kept going. "It's not dramatic, it's reality. And the reality is, your words and silence have hurt me more than you'll ever understand." The tension at the table was unbearable. My father looked at me with that tired, silent look again. My mother stared at her coffee, avoiding all of us. She laughed, softly mocking. "Cruel. So this is how it ends, with you attacking us?" I shook my head, tears forming. "This isn't attacking. This is truth. This is what I've been holding inside for too long." Her voice rose. My father's jaw tightened. My mother still stayed silent, but her eyes glistened. Everything felt like it was about to break. The air was heavy with words that were unsaid, emotions that were bottled up. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, but my voice came out trembling. "Do you hear me? Do you see what you've done?" She slammed her hand on the table. "Enough," she shouted. "You think you know everything, but you don't." My chest felt like it was collapsing. The noise, the anger, the silence, it all crashed down on me at once. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But I stayed, because leaving would mean letting her win. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No, I'm not going to let this be quiet anymore," I said. My voice was shaken, but it was loud. "You can't just hurt someone and pretend it didn't happen. Silence is part of the harm." They all stared at me. My mother blinked fast. My father's eyes were fixed on the table. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The silence that followed was worse than anything else. It felt endless. My chest ached. My tears fell silently. I felt stripped bare, not just by her words, but by the realization that I was standing alone in my truth. "Finally," I said softly, almost to myself, "this changes everything." I walked away from the table. My steps felt heavy but certain. I went into my room, shut the door, and leaned against it. My knees shook. I was exhausted. But in that moment, I knew I had crossed the line. because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every moment I had been silenced, every injustice that had been ignored, every person who had been told they were too sensitive to speak. And I knew that something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just Alec Rose anymore. I was a voice. And that voice wasn't going to be silent again. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. My chest still felt heavy, but it wasn't the same weight. It was lighter in a way I didn't expect, like I had carried it all out into the open, even if it had cost me everything at that table the night before. I didn't speak to anyone right away. I just sat by my window, watching the light shift slowly through the trees. The quiet felt different now. No longer a silence that swallowed me, but a silence that demanded I reflect. When my parents came into the kitchen later that day, there was no rushing words, no pretense of normalcy. It felt like we were all carrying something we couldn't quite name. My mother avoided my gaze again, but this time it wasn't the same as before. There was an unspoken tension. My father kept his eyes fixed on his coffee mug, but he didn't leave the table. She was quiet too, but I could tell she was thinking, maybe for the first time. For me, something had shifted. I realized the fight wasn't just about the words she said. It was about the silence that allowed them to stand unchallenged. It was about my parents not stepping in, and it was about breaking free of that silence, even when it terrified me. I began to understand that silence wasn't protection, it was permission. Permission for harm to continue. And now, I didn't want to give it any more. That week, I started talking. 2 friends, 2 people I trusted. I shared pieces of my story. Every time I spoke, it felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself. The weight lifted slightly each time. I knew there was no going back to pretending. But I also knew that the truth didn't always change people. Sometimes it leaves wounds open. Sometimes it makes things worse before they get better. That was a risk I was willing to take. One afternoon, I found myself walking alone in the park. I could still feel the echoes of that argument. But there was something in the air that felt different, like I had stepped into a moment where change was possible. I whispered to myself, this is the moment that matters. Because it wasn't just about me. This was about every person who had ever been silenced. Every person who had been told to ignore the pain. Every voice that had been crushed by silence. I thought about how injustice grows quietly, without confrontation. How silence can be louder than any words. And I realized that standing up wasn't a choice anymore. It was a necessity. I knew my path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be nights like before, where silence threatened to swallow me whole again. But I also knew I had to keep speaking, keep telling my truth. And maybe, just maybe, my voice could become part of something bigger, something that made a difference. I walked home that evening with my shoulders straighter. The air felt sharper, cleaner somehow. I knew the fight wasn't over, not for me, not for anyone. But for the first time, I felt ready. When I stepped inside my home, I heard my mother in the kitchen. She spoke softly, not looking at me, but her voice was different, less guarded. Alec, we need to talk. I paused. My heart beat faster. I nodded quietly. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. Silence would no longer decide my story. And as I walked toward her, I thought about the truth. I had finally found the truth that still burns inside me today. Silence isn't peace. Silence is surrender. So I will never surrender again, because my voice matters, because your voice matters. And the question now is, how long will the world keep listening in silence?